Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and this video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 12 hours. We have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about the northern directions. During the previous 12 hours, pro-Ukrainian sources confirmed that Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to establish complete control over the settlement of Grabovsky. So this update was published by a pro-Ukrainian source. So this is, for example, the situation on the ground by the end of the 20th of December of 2025, and this is exactly the moment when the Russians, according to different pro-Russian sources and neutral mappers, managed to establish complete control over the settlement of Grabovsky. And as you can see, just 4 days after, pro-Ukrainian sources confirmed the same information. But I would like to point your attention that several pro-Russian sources stated that Russians managed to improve their positions further in the western direction and to enter the settlement of Ryasne. But this information was published 2 days ago, so basically during this period of time we haven't received anything regarding additional progress on the ground. Either the Russians are not going to move further and deeper, or the Ukrainians have redeployed additional reinforcements and reserves in this area with the purpose to stabilize the situation, and they managed to stabilize the situation at least partially. Now let's talk about the Kupiansk direction. During the previous 12 hours, additional changes on the ground were recorded in the Kupiansk direction, but not in the city of Kupiansk itself. So these are the changes on the ground between the dates. As you can see, pro-Ukrainian sources improved their positions along the river of Oskol in its northern part around the settlement of Doroshevka and Zapadne. So these changes were made based on the report that was published by a neutral mapper, but at the same time we see that it's already third or fourth day in a row when we haven't received anything from the city of Kupiansk itself. As we discussed in the previous videos, most likely the Ukrainian offensive operation in this direction has been completely exhausted, and most likely now Ukrainians need either regrouping or to even stop their counter-offensive operation completely, to withdraw their positions and to stabilize the situation around the city of Kupiansk itself. Anyway, if the Ukrainian counter-offensive operation indeed is exhausted, this means that the Russians will be able to regroup themselves in coming days and then to launch a counter-offensive operation with the purpose to restore control over the territories they lost during the Ukrainian counter-attack in this direction that took place that have been taking place since the beginning of December of 2025. Now let's discuss the situation in the Slaviansk direction. During the previous 12 hours, the pro-Ukrainian sources, more precisely the General Staff of the Armored Forces of Ukraine, confirmed that Ukrainians lost the city of Siversk completely and that Ukrainian forces were forced to fall back from this direction further in the western direction. As you can see, during the previous 12 hours, the map has been adjusted according to pro-Ukrainian sources. We have adjusted the map as well. We colored this small part of the Slaviansk direction along this tree line and the complete as a gray zone, because the pro-Ukrainian sources reported that Russians improved their positions there. Now we see that the Russians continue their offensive operation in the western direction, and we see that the Ukrainians don't show almost any resistance in this area, and most likely this Russian offensive operation will continue until they get to the city of Nikolaevka and the Slaviansk, let's say, power station. So the Seversky Donetsk-Donbass canal is the next barrier for Russians and the next stop for the armed forces of the Russian Federation. Now let's talk about the city of Kostiantynivka. During the previous 12 hours, lots of important updates were recorded. The Russians launched their major offensive operation in the direction of the city of Kostiantynivka with just one purpose: to break through Ukrainian defense and to establish complete control over the southern, the southeastern and the southwestern parts of the city of Kostiantynivka. There are very heavy clashes through the entire line of combat contact in this area, and as you can see according to these videos, the Russians are not using sabotage and reconnaissance group with the purpose to infiltrate Ukrainian positions and to get as deep as possible. The Russians are using vehicles. The Russians are using tanks, dozens of tanks. The Russians use hundreds of armored vehicles, hundreds of soldiers, with the purpose to break through the Ukrainian defense and to enter the settlement. But at the same time, we see that these Russian vehicles are very, very heavy armored. We see that Ukrainians using the hundreds of drones, but basically they can't do anything for this equipment and for these vehicles. So this video, as you can see, is a very long video. We have a lots of episodes, and all these attacks, all these strikes with FPV drones shown the Russian assault group took place along the TO-516 road between the cities of Torets and Kostiantynivka. So according to these icons, according to their positions, we see that the Russians began offensive operation and they were moving through this road, and during this, let's say during the movement, the Ukrainians were attacking Russians, but as we discussed, they used hundreds of drones, but as we can see, they couldn't deal any damage to Russian tanks and vehicles. Most likely the Russians managed to enter the city of Kostiantynivka to land infantry and to reinforce this direction. Furthermore, we have a report that most likely Russians managed to enter the most southern part of the city of Kostiantynivka. We're talking about this industrial zone, and most likely currently there are very heavy clashes for this territory. The Russians are tasked to take this territory under complete control, because from these positions Russians will try to establish fire control or physical control over the N20 road that connects the settlements of Bereztok and Kostiantynivka. So Russians are trying to cut, or at least they are trying to cut and to destroy the logistic of the armed forces of Ukraine that supply and support the village of Bereztok. The village of Bereztok is currently the most fortified area in the southern part of the city of Kostiantynivka. This is basically the Kostiantynivka gates. If Russians can take this settlement under control, most likely then we can start counting days before complete collapse of the entire defensive layer of the city of Kostiantynivka itself. But as of now, the Ukrainians are holding their positions. The Russians are trying to improve their positions to the south of the settlement. The Russians are trying to establish complete control over the northern shore of the Kliban-Bytska water reservoir. This information during the previous 12 hours was provided by pro-Russian sources. Right now in front of your screens, you can see the changes on the ground in this area between the dates. So Russians are trying to take these pockets under complete control, and due to this configuration of the front line, we believe that in coming days or even hours, the Ukrainians would be forced to fall back from these two pockets between in the area of the Kliban-Bytska water reservoir in the northern direction. They will be forced to do this, otherwise they would be caught by the Russians in cauldron. Furthermore, this morning we received a report that Russians began another offensive operation, and this time the Russians are attacking the city of Kostiantynivka from the east along this tree line. So this information was provided by a pro-Russian source. As of now, we don't know for sure whether the Russians managed to complete all their task, but one thing according to this source is that Russians land infantry in this area and managed to dig in deeper on the most eastern part of the city of Kostiantynivka. So all these updates, all these reports are telling us about one thing, that the next target for the Russians is the city of Kostiantynivka. They will try to fight for this territory, but according to the current situation and due to the fact that the Russians during the previous months haven't managed to cut the main logistic line, the road N20 that goes between the cities of Drushkovka and Kostiantynivka, this means that Ukrainians will have enough of resources, enough of forces to hold their positions on the territory of the city of Kostiantynivka for a very long period of time. So according to the situation, we believe that Ukrainians will be able to hold their positions for 4 or even 5 months, and most likely the battle for the city of Kostiantynivka will be finished only just by May of 2026. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Zaporizhzhia direction. During the previous 12 hours, according to pro-Russian sources, the Ukrainians managed to reinforce this direction significantly. Dozens of battalions, regiments and brigades were redeployed in this direction just with one purpose: to hold the river of Gaichul. As we discussed the battle for the river of Gaichul is probably the most important battle through the entire special military operation line of combat contact, because this river and control over this river and control over the dense network of the fortifications to the west of the river opens the Russians the way and the roads to attack further in the western direction, and the most important, to attack the city of Zaporizhzhia itself from the east. So that is why the Ukrainians will not count losses, Ukrainians will not count forces, with the purpose just to hold this line and not to allow the Russians to cross the river and to cross this dense layer of the fortifications. But the most important problem is that Russia Russians continue advancing in the territory of Gulay-Polya, and that there are very heavy clashes already on the western outskirts of the settlement. And the most important is that the Russians continue developing their foothold on the Ukrainian side of the river of Gaichul around the settlements of Ostapovskaya, Pishchane, Bratskaya, and Andreevka. I would like to remind you that just yesterday the Russians captured the settlement of Andreevka, according to the Minister of Defense, and according to this video, where we can see how Russians were fighting for the settlement, and where we can see how Russians through the settlement were raising their flags. So the situation is complicated, but at the same time we see that Russians were slowed down in comparison with previous period of the, let's say, Zaporizhzhia offensive operation. So which means that most likely as of now this defense layer works. We're talking about the combination of river defense strongholds and soldiers that were redeployed in this direction. But it seems that it's just a matter of time when Russians will be able to bridge this defense layer and to continue moving further in the western direction. As for the southern directions, during the previous 12 hours, we just received a report, not just report, but some pictures and videos of the aftermath of the Geraint 2 kamikaze drone strikes on the, let's say, bulk carrier in the port of Odessa that took place between the nights between the 22nd and 23rd of December of 2025. As you can see, special services of Ukraine were trying to stabilize the situation. So we are waiting for additional updates. Some sources are saying that probably this upcoming night or these upcoming nights the Russians will carry out another massive missile and drone attack through the territory of Ukraine. An important thing that several Western sources noted that Russians changed their tactics. For example, the pro-Western media says that yesterday, for the first time, four aircrafts from different regions of Russia were involved in attacks on Ukraine. 4 different bases, and that was a very complicated operation, but most likely due to the situation Russians will continue using these tactics that allows Russians to use more missiles at the same time and to use more drones to attack the energy and critical infrastructure of the territory of Ukraine. And that's it for today, for the short video on military summary. Channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.